Well, hey everyone, Susan here, and I'm super excited for you to meet Lisa Marceau. She is a second-time founder. Her newest venture is called Joyuus. She is focused on helping women with their postpartum health, and she is tackling some of the most challenging areas. What you might not realize is that even in the United States, women still die in childbirth. The rates for depression are significant, and it's just something that, as women, and for those of you who are not women but you love women, have women in your life, that we just in the United States, like, have a baby, go back to work, and there is no real period of taking that time to heal, to bond, and to just be. My gosh. And so Lisa's going to talk about her journey to founding this company, especially during one of the most challenging, stressful times in her life, where she goes through a sudden divorce and is laid off from a job, and she starts a company, and it's incredible. And for those of you who've ever thought about starting a company and you're like, I've got too much life happening right now, I think this is the episode for you. And Lisa is absolutely incredible. So before we get into the episode, I just want to share a little bit about a couple things that are going on. One, that in the previous episode, if you didn't hear it, I was talking about AI. I was talking about the Elon Musk and OpenAI lawsuit. I started a new series within the series where I'm talking about my own journey in terms of founding the pause.ai, what is going on with us. And so it's almost like a bit of a founder diary that's happening at the end of each show. So definitely check that out. And it'll be at the end of this show too. And then if you are looking to take your LinkedIn to the next level, oh my gosh, Agency 8 is doing some incredible things. I just saw this morning a preview of what they did for one of my MIT classmates. They did a new banner. His profile photo looks amazing. New descriptor. I mean, it's ridiculously good. If you want to see an example of their work, go to my LinkedIn profile, Susan Slime, my personal one, and you can check it out. So we have a very simple, easy package for you. Just go to agency8.com and just get them to do your LinkedIn. LinkedIn is the bomb. It is amazing. So go check it out. And again, full disclosure, I am the founder of that business, but I no longer run it, which is fabulous. And so my daughter Avery oversees it. You've heard some of her social media shows along with Diana Farrar. So go check it out at agency8.com. So with that, we are going to get into the show with the amazing founder of Joyuus and a dear friend, the incredible Lisa Marceau. This is Raw and Real Entrepreneurship, the show that brings the no-nonsense truth of what is required to start, grow, and scale your business. I am your host, Susan Slime. Well, Lisa, first and foremost, it is so great to have you here. And I'm super excited because we are also going to get to hang out in person and have maybe some cocktails, coffee. It's all going to be good in Orlando. And Lisa, one of the things you and I have been speaking about a lot is this whole concept of the environment for female founders and fundraising. And I want to just jump in right there and start with some statistics. So we know that less than 2.5% of female-led pitches to VCs get funded. We know that we're also in a climate where it's still approximately only 20% of all US-based companies have at least one female founder. That's not tech, that's just all companies combined. And so I want to jump right in with the first question. As a woman, have you experienced, I would say, you and I talk about data bias, but have you experienced, do you think, gender bias in terms of going out and pitching?
First of all, just thrilled to be here having this conversation with you and talking about some of these really important questions that are affecting female founders in particular. And that's an awesome place to start because we, in my career, I have experienced it in a really interesting way. And it's maybe not the way you would have thought. When some of the companies that I'm working with and the one that I started, Joyuus, the question really was around why are you a nonprofit? Why are you looking for for investment, and that was really interesting. We kept getting that over and over. And one of the questions that struck me is, why are we being considered a nonprofit when we're talking about postpartum health and maternal health and some of the big gaps in women's health? Why does that get sidelined? So the question kept coming up, and the answer was, well, come back to us when you have kind of something real. And that's where I saw probably most of the bias, is why are we not considered part of the kind of mainstream private funding?
Come back when you have something real. Interesting. I had a founder on the show, and she had founded a company in the glamping, like the first glamping company. And I can't remember how many pitches she did, it was over 75. And someone comes in, she's already at revenue. A guy comes in to a VC fund out of Wall Street, and he has an idea literally on a PowerPoint and gets a ton of funding. And she was denied, right? Like the same thing. And we know that, and firstly, I want to shout out to all the men listening. I came just before Lisa and I started the show. I came from coffee. I was telling Lisa, and I was chatting with a friend of mine who does oversee a lot of different funding that is going on. And we were still talking about the disparities. And so the women are asked different questions than men. And they're consistently asked about their home life. And it can come off very much like, oh, so, tell me what, do you have a family and things like that. It comes off very chatty, but the women are getting asked different things. So has it been your experience, Lisa, where in those pitches, you're also getting asked questions that might be considered a little more personal, that are out of alignment with what you're wanting to present as a founder?
I think that what's really interesting is that, so I'm one of the company that I founded is a company for postpartum health, right? So when I pitch, I talk about a very personal story that I experienced when I went through postpartum. So I talk about my, kind of sitting in my rocking chair with my baby girl sobbing while, trying to get her back to sleep after someone come visited our house and woke the baby. And I tell this story because I went through that not knowing that I had postpartum depression. I have 3 beautiful children. And it wasn't until 20 years later that I realized that the experience that I was going through was actually postpartum depression. So when I start the pitch, that's the story that I tell, because I want people to understand that when they say 1 in 3 moms have negative outcomes after they have a baby, they say 50% of moms don't actually have maternal care. These are not problems that affect women in a bubble, right? So if I'm not being able to function in the role that I have, everything around me is also impacted. And so to your question about like these personal kind of questions that differentiate us somehow from like the rest of the world, that is all of us. And the impact is really, really broad. And I think when you say like, it, how, talk about your family and talk about kind of chatty and not really getting to the substance of why you're there. I think it is a big distraction, because we tend not to get the time to talk about the reason why these things actually matter and why we are needing to make an impact and make change in this space.
Yeah, absolutely. And I think we are finally having a forum to talk about postpartum, to talk about menopause, and to talk about the issues. And one of the things that you and I have discussed is that there are some significant challenges. It sounds very elegant to say, oh, we're going to use technology to solve this, right? It's not so simple, because there are different populations within a population, right? So like for menopause, there's chemopause. So women who went into menopause because they were they were diagnosed with cancer. Then there's forced menopause. A woman has a hysterectomy. Mia, who the co-founder at the pause, she went into menopause at 32, and yet we're bucketizing a lot of men and women just under an umbrella of whatever it is, prostate cancer or postpartum or cardiovascular disease. And technology is allowing us to say, hey, now we can actually be a lot more granular. Let me ask you this, going back to the concept of Joyuus, like just this giving. One of the things we talk about a lot on the show is, when did you have that moment? It's like, this is something I want to start. This is something I want to do.
Interesting, because I worked I worked for a clinical research organization for 30 years. I ran the organization, and I built digital products to fill the gap between clinical best practice and real world. So I was working in this space for a really long time. A lot of the work that I did was in maternal health, women's health, and one day I was talking to a colleague of mine, an obstetrician. She's a medical advisor on our team, and she's amazing. And we were chatting, and I said, well, when moms come back to you after they have their baby, what are some of the issues that they're bringing up? She said, that's the problem. After they have a baby, they don't come back to us because we're the obstetricians. And that's where they get lost in care. And that's where that conversation was the spark of the idea to say, this is an enormous gap. Now, like with all kind of startups, that idea had to percolate for a while and really kind of, I spent some time figuring out kind of with her and then along the journey, how to really make it into something that women could use. And so that was kind of the little seed that really started the question, but it really started before that, because I think startup really always comes from, what is the gap that needs to be filled? And that's what I've been doing for most of my career, is where is the gap? And how do we solve that? How do we provide something that's going to be meaningful and impactful to solve the problem that exists? And so one of the things that I think is really important is that Joyuus is a really important product that we are developing, but women's health as a category and FemTech as a category is an area that has so much potential and need and opportunity, because there are so many gaps that are out there to be filled.
You mentioned FemTech. I was at a mixer, and there was a guy, VC, he goes, what is FemTech? And he was serious. He was serious. Like, and I commended him. I said, I want to acknowledge you for asking. Thank you. Thank you for asking. Like, and I don't want to ever shame anyone for asking a question. I would never shame my kids. There are a lot of people who don't know, even people listening, what FemTech is. It is a very broad umbrella for technology that directly impacts women, but women are also a very broad category. We have different seasons of our lives, so that to be able to say there's FemTech, there's biotech within FemTech, there's all sorts of things. Right. There's IoT devices, you name it. Lisa, the so often we all get ideas, right? It's like, oh yeah, this is a company I want to start. There was a survey I read that it was actually in USA Today. It said 70% of Americans want to start their own business. Only 7% of them ever do. So it's one thing to have an idea, but where did you find the courage to say, I'm actually going to go do this? Because you've had a very illustrious career. And when someone goes and starts a company, they're probably not making any money. There's a lot on the line, right? Most startup founders, I know, I'm not, don't pay themselves initially, right? So you better hope you have some savings or you have another stream of income to like kind of float your boat for a while. But where did you get the courage to say, I'm actually going to go do this? And especially speaking to someone who's listening right now, really resonating with, I have a problem. I know there's something I want to solve, but where did you find that? for you?
You know what, I'm really fortunate in that, and I got a shout out to my coach over the years, who really asked me two really important questions that really changed my perspective. Because I'm not a risk taker. I'm not the one who's like, okay, I'm going to go start up and I've got this and let's get out there. And that was never me. I was like in the stable, employed environment for a really long time. Worked in corporate for a while. And what's fascinating is the way I started my company, Alpha Millennial Health, and then Joyuus, really is something you'd be like, don't ever do that, right? I was in the middle of a pandemic with 3 kids at home, and to be perfectly real, I was in the middle of a divorce that came out of nowhere, and I was laid off from a job that I'd had for a long time, and in that moment, one might say, I need to go figure this out and find another job. And I remember sitting on my front porch and I'd sit out there and eat breakfast with my daughter. And I sit out and I thought, why do I want to jump right back into something that didn't serve me? And going back to kind of the things that I worked through with my coach kind of several years before, she asked me 2 questions. And I think these are the most powerful questions. They stick with me now. One is, why did you think you had job stability just because you got a paycheck? So I would say, first of all,
yeah,
think about that, right? Right.
yeah.
We all believe that we have stability because we are getting paid by a paycheck. But I think if we all think about it, we know someone or ourselves, our own experiences where that isn't necessarily true.
Mm-hmm.
And the other thing she asked me, and this one kind of struck me really deeply, is she said, when have you experienced financial failure? And now I'd been in a career for 30 years and I have 3 children and, raised a family and built a career. I said, never. And she goes, why do you suppose that is? And my answer, without even thinking, was because I've had to. So when I sat on the porch thinking about starting my own company, which I'd always kind of had in the back of my mind as something I wanted to do, and now there's this gap that I feel like there's this work that needs to be done, and I just don't want to go back into the environment that I had been in. I thought, why not start it? There is no financial failure and there is no fear because I have to make it work.
Yeah.
And so that's kind of where the power came from to start both Alpha Millennial and then ultimately Joyuus, is, to really lean into what drives you and where your passion comes from. And that's, I think, one thing I think is really, really important. And in the journey to start up, your goal the mission has to be driven by passion, right? It has to be driven by passion. If your goal is to make money, that's not that's an outcome, right? That's an outcome. The goal is really to make an impactful change, whatever that means to you. And if that's your goal and your mission, you're gonna make it work. You're gonna find the way to get there. And if your goal is money, I'd say find another path, because money is never a goal, and you will kind of only ever think very narrowly and you'll have blinders on the whole way, and you won't be able to see. A startup is change and evolution. Where you start and where you end are never going to be the same place, right? So if you're not open to all of the ideas and the innovations and the changes that come along that pathway, that's where success comes from, right? That's where companies really succeed, when they hear and are open to all those modifications, those evolutions. And if your goal is money, you stick on a path because that's what you think is going to get you there. So I think that's a really important thing. And I'd say to anyone out there listening who wants to start their own business, is really have a passion that really means something to you.
Which is huge, because as the founder, that has to get you up in the morning. And then there's also the investors who money is important to them, right? And as an investor, one of the things I always ask any startup that I've invested in is, what is your exit plan? And what is your path to revenue? And I want to see a pro forma, and all of those things. And it's funny, as we're raising money for the pause, and I'm on the other side of that. where's your pro forma? What's your path to exit? And I'm also telling stories about menopause, and I'm telling my own story. And you go back and forth. Your heart is in the same place, but you've got to be nimble and to be able to wear those hats. What has been for you? You've done such an incredible job because you have non-dilutive funding with grants. You have amazing technical partners that have helped enable your technology. But I want you to share with the world listening the hats you wear, and which is the easiest hat for you to wear, and which is the one that is still the most challenging at times to put on.
Oh man, that is a great question. And I think I mean, I guess part of my strength, I would say, is compartmentalization, because sometimes it's just making sure that I'm working on the right thing during the right time of day. There are definitely things that I can't do first thing in the morning, and there are definitely things I will never do late in the afternoon, just the way my brain works. So sometimes it's how do I organize my hats, essentially, right? Um, and knowing who I am and how I operate, and where my focused brain is versus, when do I write, when do I do billing and accounting. So I guess part of it is that I really appreciate most of the hats, because I learn so much in the process, and I think collaboration is so critical to the process. That's one thing that helps me be able to enjoy them, because I know what I don't know, but I also want to learn in the process. I have like you mentioned, I have a really great technology partner who is overseeing the engineering team, and I learn a lot. I don't have to have input on every step. I need to have strategic vision, and I have to have input on the bigger picture, and I need to be able to answer questions. But I also need to listen and learn. And so um, I guess though each hat has its benefits is how I tend to think about it in a strange way.
So of all the, I'm going to ask the question, and I'll share for you mine, right? Like wearing all the hats as a founder. So everything from going into Carta to refining the pitch deck to going out and networking to working with the team that is the technical team, because I am a technical founder. Like all the hats for me, you said something really key, which is the time of day you put those hats on. I am so fresh in the morning. That's when I want to make my decisions. I want to review contracts, though. Absolutely. Late at night, I don't want any hat on.
Yeah.
No, just put the hats in the closet. I don't want to have them on. But how do you create boundaries?
I am very fortunate in that I have worked virtually for a big chunk of my career, not full time. I worked 4 days in the office. I did the 2 hour commutes. I worked in the office varying kind of days per week over my career. But one thing that was important is, and I think this is the value of making sure you balance with your family, and you kind of respect that as well, is I got my kids to daycare, got my kids on the bus, that was super important for me. So
Mm.
even though I would, go screaming out of the house to get on the road, it would be after I got my kids up and on the bus, for example. Or so those boundaries for me have been set for a long time. I have a work day. It might be longer some days than others, but I have a work day, and maybe I can be flexible whether that starts at 7. I'm like you. I'm fresh in the morning. I want, if I'm doing accounting, it's going to be in the morning probably. If I'm writing, it's going to be, it's not going to be at 5:30 at night. But it's important for me to make sure that I am giving time to the people in my life that deserve that from me as well. So that
Mm-hmm.
boundary was really easy to create. And sometimes, that's what we have to remind ourselves, right? It's also, I think the other boundary that I have really kind of grown to respect in myself is that um, your bucket will be as empty as you allow it to be. And what I mean by that is, if you are always willing to have an empty bucket. Someone is always willing to fill it. So decide what you want as far as your time and attention and where you want to put it, because someone else is always willing to put something in that bucket for you. And you can either allow it or not allow it. And I think those are really important boundaries, especially as a founder, because you have to kind of have a vision and a pathway. You have to be open to collaboration, like we were talking about, the change and the evolutions and the nimbleness. But I think if you're not clear on some of the core things that are important to you, those boundaries get very, very gray, and it becomes really easy for someone to kind of push you in a direction or bury you in stuff that you didn't really want to be doing. You say yes to things you didn't mean to. So I think that is the other important thing, is really be clear on what are the critical things for you, and then balance yourself with your family, because they're so important. I think I might have mentioned my kids are all about to graduate and be off into the world. So no matter where you are, whether it's kids or family or whatever other joy you have in your life, it's not going to be here forever in the form that it is right now. So if you don't take this minute to find that balance and those boundaries, it's not going to be here in the future. So that's been really kind of present for me a lot of days.
Which is huge. It's this, that what is your line in the sand? And I'm the same way. Like every morning I am taking my youngest daughter to school, and that is our time. There are no calls during that time. We talk. It's very important. And that is so key. And also I think it's because, I've reached a certain season in my career that I'm willing to say no. I don't want every investor, because it's not just about an investor putting money into a company. It's about how that investor is going to show up. Do they understand the vision and the mission? Yes, we want them to get a great ROI for their investment, but I also don't want 500 texts a day that that are a distraction from actually getting things done, right? And so I think for me, I've grown to a place, Lisa, where I'm just, I'm comfortable with the word no. And I'm comfortable with no is no, and we're not looking back. And because I did have leaky boundaries for years, where it was like I said yes to things, or I was always on the road traveling, to the point where there was a period of time where I was on an airplane every week for 26 weeks, with the exception of 1 week. And I remember I was sitting there, it was a weekend, and I said to my husband, like, I feel that like my heart was racing, and I was like, the anticipation of having to get on the airplane, and I would get on the United flight, and I knew the flight attendants. Like it was because and that, how crazy is that, right? That I would know them. And so one of the things for me in terms of saying, what, I was a co-founder, and I was a co-CEO of a company, and we had offices, 2 overseas, 2 domestically. And I loved it, and I grew and I learned, but I also wanted to, in creating my own company, I wanted to create something different, where it wasn't expected that people would work 16-hour days and have to be in an office. And like you said, this is a new world in terms of how we show up and how we work, and recognizing our productivity and our superpowers. So I want to ask you this. Dan Sullivan and Dr. Benjamin Hardy, they wrote a book called 10x is better than 2x. And the principle around the book, for people listening, is that so often we're doing 2x things. We're doing a lot of administrative minutia. We're kind of doing things in our comfort zone, but it isn't really focused on our superpowers. And that our superpowers, if we would focus 80% of our time on doing those things, we'd have 10x results in terms of our time freedom, our financial freedom, everything else that we would do. So Lisa Marceau, what are your superpowers in business?
I think that number one is collaboration. Because you mentioned networking before. I hate networking, to be honest with you. It's like not the thing that I love to do, but that's because it's defined by a certain thing. But what I've learned over the past kind of few years as a founder, is networking is just collaboration. with
Yeah.
authenticity.
Mhm.
Because collaboration with authenticity is really about meeting people and learning from them and being willing. It's not that I want things from people when I collaborate. I want to learn from them and I want to share what I
Yes.
am bringing
Yeah.
to the table and see if we have a match and see if they can contribute something to what I'm doing and vice versa. And that, I think, gives me a ton of joy. I learn so much, and I think it helps everything get better, grow, um, and kind of be more successful. So I would
Yeah.
say number one, it's probably my desire to collaborate.
Yeah. Networking too is the, I was asked this exact same question. And when I think of networking, I think of two things. How how can I add value to the people I'm meeting and connect them with people that will help them? And then I also think, what can I learn? Right. So I was invited to a network. Most people wouldn't know this because they would say, oh, well, she's been on stage in front of 20,000 people in Las Vegas and she's done speaking events with Tony Robbins and she's done, all this stuff. And most people think I'm naturally extroverted. I'm not. I'm a situational extrovert. It takes me more energy to go and do a networking event. If I'm speaking at an event, I just go out and I speak and I serve, and then I go back and I sit backstage and just be quiet or go back to my hotel
Yeah.
room, just like, okay, I can't talk to everyone right now. But when I network, I had to shift that for me because I wanted it to feel energizing. So now I think, oh, okay, what if I could go and learn? And what if I can meet some people and connect them with other great people? And I want to give a shout out. So Andrew Bart is a founder of a company called AlgoFace. And disclosure, I'm an advisor to that company. It's a CV company. And he started this thing, Lisa, that every 2 weeks on a Wednesday night, we all go to this wine bar. It's in like north. Like you got to drive north of Scottsdale. And there's just wine and there's no agenda and people talk. And that's the whole thing. I'm like,
That's awesome.
this is the best networking event ever.
Right? That to me is, and then when I learned that that's what networking actually, like networking has such a definition, but when you learn that networking is really just meeting people where they are and learning from them and talking to them, you have no idea when that's going to become something more powerful and interesting. And meeting you, I think is such a great example of just having conversations about what my passion is and where my interests are, and learning that you have passion and interest in a similar field, and how might we connect, and then just, here we are talking raw and real. So I think it really is about just being open to, everybody has a perspective and everybody brings something that, let's learn from each other. Makes
Absolutely.
everything
And
better.
and not everyone's going to get it. And I want to dive into Joyuus for, the not everyone's going to get it. Not everyone's going to resonate with it. Like I'm talking menopause. This is raw and real entrepreneurship. We have a PG rating. This is a very funny
Yeah.
story. So you and I are in a startup ecosystem, and Mia, the co-founder who I mentioned, we're in a meeting and it's all men. And I know I'm going to get an X rating on iTunes for what I'm about to say, but it's so funny. And Mia starts talking about the problem with menopause, and she starts talking about vaginal dryness in the meeting. And it was so funny because like the looks on the guys' faces, like some guys were like really cool and some guys like they just didn't know what to do with that. And it was so funny because I don't even know that she was cognizant that that was like one of the first things she had talked about. and and not, I've spoken to women, they're like, I've never had menopause symptoms. I've spoken to men and be like, my wife didn't really have it. And then conversely, I've had men literally get a little teary because they love their wives so much and their wives struggled so much with it. And so not everyone's going to get it. Just like Joyce, not everyone is going to resonate. But the one of my mentors, her name was Kathy Smith, and she's passed now, but she used to say, Susan, the people you're looking for are looking for you. So I want to dive in and talk about Joyce. So you have the idea and you're like, okay, I'm starting a company. And I've just been through from Holmes Rahe scale of the top 5 stressors: divorce, death, moving, losing your job, illness of a loved one. So you got 2 of the big 5, girlfriend, and you're like, this is a good idea. Let's start a company, and I'm really going to explore postpartum. So you get this company spun up. Share with everyone, like, where are you now, and what's next for the company?
Well, so I believe that all companies need to do 3 things. So that this will give you some context for where Joyuus is now. And number one is um, basically listening to your customers and your audience to make sure that you build something that is effective for their needs. So basically, does it address what they want? So that was all of the early work, is asking moms specifically, the most impacted moms, Black and brown moms, Hispanic moms, the moms who have the worst outcomes in the data. And then really learning what to build, right? So that was the effect, and then testing it, right? Making sure it works, right? Making sure you're not wrong. And this is where we talk about this idea of not just kind of assuming we know that we're right and that's the path we're going to go on to get there. Be willing to be wrong. And so we learned a lot in that process. And so now we're knee deep in the middle of a randomized controlled trial, because we need to test that what we built and what we learned from moms who said this is what they want and need is actually something that we can deliver on, right? And we're looking at effectiveness across maternal function, depression, anxiety, resilience. So really big things that really impact day to day. And some of the biggest, I think, killers of mom, depression is one of the biggest killers of moms postpartum. Hemorrhage is one of the biggest killers of moms postpartum. So these are the things we have to solve, right? So we need it to be effective. And that's the part that we are knee deep in right now. We're really focused on making sure we learn from the work in a very standardized way. The other thing that we need to do is make sure that we develop something that is efficient. That means that it is accessible to people after we finish building it. Now that's part of the go-to-market strategy, right? Making sure we can understand where our biggest targets are. For example, employers are a great avenue for a product like Joyuus, because it connects them to kind of their work. And one of the biggest stressors is work, right? So you're coming back to work after you have a baby, and you're supposed to jump right back in as if you never left. And when employers understand the power of supporting women postpartum, they understand the power of supporting the entire family, because it affects partners as well, right? It affects medical outcomes, time at work, all of that. So for example, what we're trying to learn right now is, where is that market? Where is the best, kind of the most efficient way to deliver this so the most women can access it? And then I think adaptability is a really big piece of the kind of triangle of things that have to be considered to make a product work. And if you build it based on what people actually want, and you present it in a way that is accessible through right resources, the right delivery, then you'll have a product that is adoptable, and that's how you create a successful business. We're in the thick of testing right now, so that's the current state, and the future state is really finding that pathway to deliver it to moms potentially through employers.
And there's so much to unpack there, because there's like investors like, let's get this out to market. Then there's like the granting side, which is, let's make sure that the trials and everything is in alignment with something that is what our grant application said it was. And what people listening don't know, is like, there are lots of folks to please along the path of this journey. And there's lots of learning, there's lots of growing to do. And I know Lisa and I have spoken privately about some of what her research has revealed. And that's also, it's got to be hard too, because there are a lot of problems for you to solve, right? Like, I know that people would be shocked, and you probably have the statistic that in terms of how many women die in childbirth in the United States.
One of the, that's such a great point. And this is and this is not just postpartum. I mean, this is why you're doing what you're doing and why, we see a vast kind of increase in the FemTech market in the women's health is because women are dying way too often for all the wrong reasons. These are preventable deaths, right?
Yes.
So we need to be working to do things that can help prevent the preventable deaths. And
Mhm.
childbirth, postpartum, that's an area where women should not be dying, that there are ways to solve these problems. And that's Joyuus is going to be one piece of that. And this focus on addressing the women's health market is another really critical pathway to changing some of those statistics. I can tell you a story about ovarian cancer and prostate
Yeah.
cancer and breast cancer if it puts
Absolutely.
puts a
Yeah.
fine point on this, right? So I'm writing on this right now. So ovarian cancer is 70-80% of cases are diagnosed in stage 3 or 4. Prostate cancer, 70 to 80% of the cases are diagnosed in early stage, regional stage, local stage. This is a huge impact on the 5-year survival rate, right? What's the correlation to that is that the funding for prostate cancer has always been, since I think 2012, been in the top 2 or 3 funded cancers. Ovarian cancer has been in the bottom 2 or 3 of the funded cancers. So one might say, well, it's just a funding problem, then we need to get up to speed on the funding. But in my research and doing this, like really kind of digging into this, what I came across is a meta-analysis of ovarian, breast, and prostate cancer at the genome-wide level.
Mm-hmm.
And what that research started to demonstrate, and it looked at 400 and some thousand cancers, 25% of all cancers in that space. And what it started to uncover is that if we look at it across the spectrum, we actually can see that there might be markers really early on for these hormone-related cancers that could increase preventative treatments way before they're even diagnosed in the first place. So it's not a gender specific issue if we start to look at it across all of the data. And that's where I think for the stuff with AI becomes super important, right? It's not just about women's health. It's about how we need women's health in the mix at the same level and same power as all of the other health research, because that's where we can see patterns and make change.
Absolutely. And that's it, like how we started the show is yes, I stand on my soapbox and I'm going to be speaking about this by the time the show is released in Silicon Valley for the Silicon Valley Education Foundation. I'm talking about the future of women in AI and how do we encourage young women to come into this profession. My whole come from is what are we inviting them to? If we're telling them they're going to fail to get their ideas funded 97.5% of the time, then that's it's not that enticing, right? And I think what we have to stop doing is having gender bias in the funding, especially as we're trying to really solve problems that affect all of us. Because no, a woman might not get prostate cancer, obviously, but her husband might, or her son might, or her father might, or her brother might. And this affects us all. It's like the heart disease kills more women in the United States than all the top 5 cancers combined. And yet 70% of that data set is on men. So it's not able to accurately give the level of prediction that we might deserve. Let's put it that way,
Yeah.
right? So to your point, we are seeing technology enablements that are really going to change the landscape of our health outcomes. And that's why I always say like AI, the big bright spot is for healthcare. And that's why sweeping legislation that affects all AI could actually damage some of the goals we are trying to achieve in healthcare. So that is a whole topic for another conversation. So I want to ask you a final question. So the journey that you've had now in launching this company and doing, you're in the weeds with the research. I know we've got, you and I are talking about some of the events you're going to be speaking at and really in terms of, building out this business, if you could go back a few years and give yourself some advice based on what you know now, what advice would you give yourself?
I would give myself the advice to be very clear in what you want this to look like for yourself, and don't be afraid to speak up. Don't be afraid to ask for what you want, and don't be afraid to say, this is what I want from this.
Yeah.
Too often we don't do that.
Yeah. And I love that you said that, because that, in going back to Dan Sullivan's book, with Dr. Benjamin Hardy, that Dan's talking about wants versus needs. And we don't have to justify our wants. We want what we want, right?
Right.
You want to solve this problem for women, right? And that's okay. You don't have to justify that. That's, there's a lot of badassery there, my friend. Like you want what you want, and that's okay. And I would just say to all of us, I love that advice, Lisa, is just like, let's just be okay with wanting what we want. And as Lisa said, when we come from that place of collaboration and really helping to uplift each other up to those wants, then we step out of that competitive plane, which has a lot of taking energy and a lot of toxic, destructive energy. And, these problems that affect all of us, that, for you and I as founders that we're working to solve, can really, positively make an impact, which is so tremendous. So Lisa, I can't wait to see you in person. So follow all of our social media, because it's going to be all over. We're going to shoot some videos. We have some announcements coming out. Lisa and I think we're going to be on a little traveling roadshow, because we're going to be together a few times over the rest of the year. So you just have to, you know what? We should wear hats every time we're photographed.
Great idea. We should get some hats. Which hat are we wearing now?
Yeah. Which hat are we wearing now? And if you would like to, when you see us in person, if you know where we're going to be, this is now going to be a thing.
We're wearing the hats.
We're going to start
too many hats.
We're going to start receiving random hats. I love it. I love it. Well, Lisa, thank you so much for being on the show. And thank you just for everything you do in the world. I'm so excited to follow your research. It has a tremendous heart space for me as well. And I'm going to I'm so excited to be on the front line, cheering you on, getting to witness firsthand you building this company. I think it's amazing, sister.
Well, thank you. And I'm so pleased to be here and to be able to talk about it, and just have the support again of women like you who are out there doing the same. So let's do it together.
Yep.
Love the message.
Bring it on.
That's right.
All right, everyone. Well, if you want to find out more about Joyuus, about Lisa, just check out the show notes on susansly.com. Make sure you are following on all of our social, on everywhere we are, on Instagram, on X, on LinkedIn, on Facebook. We're there. And I don't know what the future of TikTok is, so the show doesn't have a TikTok. But anyway, so with that, God bless. Go rock your day. And I will see you in the next episode. Well, hopefully you enjoy the show with Lisa. And as you heard, I mean, my gosh, starting a business when you go through an unexpected divorce, where you've been laid off, it's a pandemic, and you get the courage to do that, and to be able to go out there and figure out, hey, there's a problem I want to solve. And even though I haven't had experience in doing this, and I've been working, for someone else for 30 years, I'm going to go do it anyway. I mean, talk about incredible. And I loved the 2 questions that Lisa's coach asked her. And so in this episode, I'm going to talk about the latest update with the pause.ai. So one of the things that I want to do differently as a multiple time founder, if you include the agency that I started, not just co-founding a computer vision company, but other things I've done, I wanted to create our infrastructure platform and the enablers before I launched the product itself. And so what I did is I went and the announcement came that I was doing this company, And friends reached out who I had known from Hewlett Packard Enterprise. And you may think about HP, like laptops and stuff. You have no idea how big that company is in terms of being a global company and all of the tech enablement. They have their cloud enabler, which is GreenLake, and then they have servers and IoT devices, and you name it. It's a massive company. And I do have some really close friends who work there, and I love them, and they're absolutely incredible. And so one of them reached out to me and said, "Hey, did you know we have a startup incubator, and we will help support you along with our partner Alpha 3 Cloud, run by Ron Sachs. And after you go through a technical due diligence, if you're invited into the program, you will be one of our preferred DEI startups." And so we have been going through technical due diligence and our architecture and going through questions, everything from Kubernetes to Docker. If you don't know what that means, that's totally fine. You know, and how we're going to launch and how we're going to scale and our financials. And so that has been going on for the last probably in the neighborhood of just under 8 weeks. And I'm so happy to announce that we have been accepted into the program, and we will be part of the Hewlett Packard system. And which is, we didn't announce it. It was very challenging because a lot of our investors have asked for a valuation cap on the initial investment. And I have been really wanting to not give a valuation cap. And if you don't know what that means, it's saying, okay, hey, if you invest in the company, this is what the company is essentially worth even before we're at revenue. And so with the hyperscaler announcement with Hewlett Packard, that definitely reinforces the value of the company. So I'm just so very grateful. That was a huge win. And as this podcast is being released, we're going to be in Orlando. There's going to be an announcement about it. And I just, you know, again, I'm so grateful. I'm so grateful for all of you, the listeners, for all of the support. And I would say the biggest thing that I'll share with you is that relationships matter, and taking that time every day just to reach out to people without an agenda, know their kids' names, their wife's name, their husband's name, their, you know, dog's name even, and just to care about people. And it is amazing how it comes back to you. So that is this week's Pause Diary. If you're not following us, we are on all the social media channels at The Pause AI. And then check out our website, thepause.ai. If you're not a subscriber, get on the list because we have a lot of announcements that are coming out. So with that, that's this week's diary, and I will see you in the next episode.